Good, thank you.
Okay, so I will just share my screen as well. Okay, so good morning to you. For those of you who I haven't met, I'm Laura Jeffrey and I am the librarian at Wolfson. And this forms part of our programme of workshops that are aimed to support you in your academic skills development. Quite often there's nothing hugely revelatory in these sessions, but it is an opportunity for you to stop and pause and reflect on your own learning habits, to think about how you could be perhaps a more efficient or productive researcher or learner, depending on your level of study. And yeah, we just want to give you this opportunity to kind of interact with other people, to ask me questions, and to have a go at a few different approaches that might just take your study skills development in a slightly different direction. So today we are looking at critical reading and note making. The two go really well together, so that's why we've kind of merged them into one workshop, even though we could easily spend a whole workshop on just one of them. But yeah, it seems to make more sense to deliver them in this way. So the session should last for about an hour and a half. If you need to leave at any point, that's fine. As I said, I'm recording and we'll circulate that afterwards. So let's get started. Yeah, as I said, this is just an opportunity for you to stop, to reflect, to think critically, and to practice some of these strategies as well. So hopefully you've got something to hand that you can do a little bit of reading on, a little bit of note making. The practical sessions will be very short, so it's not a very realistic way of testing these ideas out. So possibly, you know, after today, you might want to take one or two things away, have a go at them. And then I'm always really interested to hear whether or not you've put anything into practice, if anything's changed, or possibly you'll come away from this session being quite reassured that the way that you're working at the moment is possibly the most efficient. I do want to start with a few caveats. I think there's always a hope when people come on these courses that it's going to completely change the way that they read and they learn. But for a lot of people, the kind of speed at which you read is obviously not indicative of your academic ability. Sometimes you need to read something deeply and slowly. The fact that you are all here at Cambridge should reassure you that you are capable of doing this course, and sometimes the reading just is really tough and slow and there's no kind of easy way around it. Next term, we're going to run a workshop on sort of technically speed reading, just ways of picking up your the number of words that you kind of can read per minute. And that's not the idea of today's workshop. Today is much more kind of strategic. There are obviously always going to be challenges. As I said, it might be the material that you're reading. It might be if you're a neurodiverse student or researcher. If English isn't your first language, it's going to take you longer to digest the material. Equally, if English is and you're reading something in a foreign language, it might just take you longer to digest that. Ultimately, it's really important that you understand what you're reading. And that's why I've said here, you know, the deep reading is really, really important that you get to engage with the material. It's not just about opening a book, moving through it, moving on to the next thing, and then getting to the end of the day and thinking, actually, I don't really know what I've taken from any of that, even though I've kind of technically been reading or at least looking at this material all day. So yes, please don't kind of go away from a session like this and think, yeah, but it still takes me ages to digest something. Sometimes that is just the case. But it's also, I think, helpful to kind of reflect on what we mean when we're talking about reading. There's several stages to it. And this is one model where there are kind of 7 stages to it. So first of all, there's just the recognition. Do we recognize the characters in front of us? It's then actually about getting it into our brain. Now, so if you're visually impaired, to be reading, to assimilate something might be listening to an audio file, or if you're a dyslexic student, you might find listening to audio files works better in order to get the material into your brain. Then there's comprehension. Do we actually technically understand what the text says? Could we just summarize it really quickly in a sentence, just factually? What are the words it's saying and what is its argument? But then there's this issue of understanding, and this is kind of where kind of academic reading comes in more, this idea of comparing it to everything else that we've read, that's setting up that reading within a context. That's what we might consider kind of reading when we're thinking about academic reading. But there's also these other stages as well. You know, can we retain it? And that's where the note making comes in. That's one of the purposes of taking notes, is so that we can go back to something. We don't have to hold it all in our head. But then are we able to recall it? And are we able to recall it in a meaningful fashion that is useful for the particular assignment that you're working on? So again, we don't want to just recite or recall exactly what they've said. We want to be able to set it in that wider context. And then the whole point of reading is so that we can communicate it, whether that's verbally, if you're in a kind of seminar setting, or if you're meeting with a supervisor, talking about what you've been reading, or in terms of writing, whether that's an essay or a thesis, whatever you're working on. That's why we do the reading. And I think it's really important to hold that in mind when we're doing it. Like we said, it's not just doing the reading that's important, it's actually being able to take something from that reading and to put it to good use. Why is it we find reading difficult? All sorts of different reasons. And again, these will be individual to you. It might be that you just don't really understand the words that are put in front of you. You might not have the background knowledge to delve really deeply into some kind of theoretical exposition on something if you haven't actually kind of understood the concept in the first place. Sometimes we just get overwhelmed. You might have a massive stack of books, or you might have downloaded 20 journal articles that you feel you need to get through in a morning. It's just too much. And actually, we kind of develop a bit of a block there, in the same way that you might develop a writer's block if you're staring at a blank page and you know you've got 5,000 words to write. Like we said, the actual language, and that could be the language like English or French or Chinese, or it could be the kind of technical language of your discipline that you might be struggling to understand. You might be really distracted. So that might be your immediate environment. You might be in a busy home environment. You might be in a cafe. Some people get distracted by silence as well. So maybe working in a library does or doesn't work for you. You might be reading online, getting a load of notifications popping up, or your phone might be buzzing away. So think about those sorts of obstacles as well. Why you're doing it. And I think that goes back to that idea of having really clearly in mind kind of what is it I'm trying to communicate as a result of this reading? What's my motivation? What do I want to get out of this? And we'll unpack that a bit more in a moment. Your environment, that kind of maps onto the distractions. How accessible the text is. Again, if you have a disability, it might be that it's in a format that you are really struggling to engage with. And it might be that you're really tired. It's really difficult to read when your either eyes are tired, or you're just kind of feeling physically tired, or if you're feeling really ill and really rough, trying to keep that focus is really tough. So sometimes you have to read anyway, and you kind of can't get around that, but it's worth paying attention to, when you might work most productively, or if you aren't feeling great, are there other tasks you can do so that you can do the reading when you do feel a little bit better? So yeah, underpinning all this idea of kind of academic reading, what is it about? And again, this is kind of just a different way of saying what I've kind of said already, but it's not just about getting the reading done. It's not just about reading every word in order and then moving on to the next text. What we're really talking about is analysis here and synthesis. It's about being able to reflect on what we've read, contextualize it, and then being able to make some sort of kind of critical statement about what we've read before we move on to the next text. So it's not just about, how much did I read today in terms of words or pages, but kind of what have I got out of that reading that's really, really important. Yeah, and I think that's another thing I kind of want to sort of indicate is this idea of, the person who wrote that book or journal article didn't write it for you. They didn't write it for the course that you're studying, probably. They wrote it for themselves. That was their own research. They had a really particular purpose to writing it. You will want to get something completely different out of it, and that's absolutely fine. It's fine not to read every single word. Sometimes you might need to if you really need to understand a theorist and really understand where they're coming from, but more often than not, we are reading to kind of support our own argument. And so that's what you've kind of always got to bear in mind. Again, is why am I doing it? How is this useful? And if it's not useful, that's okay. It's okay to move on and to push it away and to move on to the next text as quickly as possible. So I think constantly being that kind of critical reader, and obviously, as you know, like being critical in this sense, we're not trying to find fault in something, but we are constantly querying and questioning everything that we read. Why was it written? What was that purpose? What was that particular author's wider theoretical framework? What time were they writing at? Were they influenced by other theorists at the time, or the research that was going on? Has new research been done since then that kind of changes the way that you think about things? Are you agreeing with what this person's written? If you're from a science background, then is it replicable in terms of other things that you've read, other research that you've possibly conducted? And how, again, that idea of how does it move my reading forward? How does it change my understanding and what I've read already? And where's it going to take me? What questions does it leave me with? And I think ultimately, you know when you've done the reading with these last kind of two questions, not just being able to restate it, that kind of comprehension element of reading something, but can we say something critical? And if you can't say something interesting at the end, if somebody asks you kind of why are you reading it, what did you get from that? If you can't say much about it, maybe you need to go back and do a little bit more reading. So yes, kind of the first bit of reading is stopping before you even open that book or that journal article. What do I want to get from this text? It might be that this is one of the first things that you've read on this particular topic. It's completely new to you, and you really do need to kind of digest pretty much all of it to get that background understanding that will set that kind of foundation for you then to kind of pursue all these different avenues and questions that text will bring up. It might be that you're working on a really small section of your thesis or an essay, and that you want to kind of answer questions specifically about that. As we said, the person who wrote this probably didn't have that in mind. Their text might be far more wide ranging. So being able to drill down and find that really relevant section is really, really important so that you don't read stuff that you don't need to. It might be that you've got your argument sorted and you just need a kind of few case studies to kind of back up a little bit more evidence or a little bit of data to just affirm the assertions that you're making. It might be that you just want a tiny citation. Quite often we read something and we make pages and pages of notes, and yet when we come to write up, we cite 6 words from that particular author. If that's all you need, because again, you've done quite a lot of writing, or you've at least kind of thought in your head what your argument is, and you just need to extract something really, really small, again, identifying that as quickly as possible, pulling it out, understanding the context in which it's written, but you don't then need to spend hours and hours digesting everything else and making loads of other notes if you don't think they're going to be relevant. Equally, it might be the flip side of that, and somebody might have asked you to read something for a reading group or a seminar where you do need to be able to summarize an entire text. So all these different purposes as to why we read something, and it's really important for you to have that in mind before you just sort of absentmindedly take a text and just plow into it. So just to kind of get you doing a little bit of that reflective thinking, just to take maybe 2 minutes to think about the last book or article that you read, and then think, why did you choose it? Possibly you were told to, or maybe it's on a reading list, or it's something you actively identified. What did you want to get from it? Which hopefully you knew before you headed in. You may not have thought of that, but you perhaps had a purpose. Did it fulfill that purpose? How did you approach the reading then? And what did you do with what you've read? So just a couple of minutes. You don't need to share this afterwards, so you can just think about it or just jot down a few ideas. Just get the timer going. Hi, Ruth. Welcome to the session. We're just in the middle of an activity at the moment, but we'll resume in a second.
Laura, have you stopped sharing screen by chance?
Oh, sorry. Yes, just to let Ruth in. Right. For some reason, it wasn't. Let me try and present from within PowerPoint. That might give me a bit more
Thanks.
flexibility. Yeah, it disables so many functions when you try and. That's a little bit better, maybe.
Thanks.
Okay. Let me just move on to it. Just shout if that's not displaying properly.
No, it works for me. Thank you.
Okay, so having that ability to kind of stop and to reflect, I think, is a really important part of the reading process. And you can do it however you like. There's quite a nice little template that's quite widely used called the KWL table, which is what do you already know? So before you start reading something, just really, really quickly, we don't want this to become a kind of really onerous task, but just quickly, what do I know already about this? So I don't want to reread that. I'm looking for something different. So what do I already know? What do I want to know? Okay, Christopher, you're not seeing my slide there. Okay, I'll just do the classic share and then I'll just have to dip in and out, I think. Okay, hopefully that's working and you can see the content now. Yeah, so this template, what do you already know? What questions are left unanswered? So from what you already know, like we said, are you looking for some more background information? Are you looking for a citation? Are you looking for a case study? This is your motivation. This is why you're even going to bother reading something different. And then on the right-hand side, this obviously will take really in-depth notes and we'll look at how we do that in a little bit. But the idea is that at the end of that, you could then say, okay, what have I learned from this process? How has this reading moved on my thinking? So from the reading that you brought along with you today, perhaps have a quick go at this little matrix. What do you already know? What do you want to know from the reading that you've got in front of you? And which questions do you want it to answer? So again, we're just going to take probably 2 minutes just to, again, give you kind of purpose in terms of approaching some reading today. As we said, we're only going to have tiny little snippets, so that what you want to get from it might not be a huge objective, but just to get some initial understanding. Okay, so hopefully that sort of little task is tiny. You probably do it subconsciously anyway, before you open a book or before you download a journal article. But sometimes it's quite nice to kind of articulate that on paper, because then that gives you a focus when you're actually doing the reading. Sometimes it's easy to lose that focus when we actually start and we get a bit sidetracked. So then there are these stages to academic reading. So I think it's quite important to note, we haven't even started doing the reading yet. We've just been thinking about it. Again, these are probably all stages that you do in some way, shape or form. But first of all, it's really important, as we say here, not just to open something, even if you've been told to read it, and just start doing the reading. It's really important to identify whether or not this is relevant to your needs. Does this actually require close reading? And how do you do that? We all do it by looking at the title. That would be the most obvious way. If it doesn't sound relevant, we possibly wouldn't pursue it. But again, if you've been asked to read it, you might delve a little bit deeper. So something like the abstract or the blurb on a book or the first few paragraphs of an introduction are going to give you some sort of indication what this is even about. Does this meet your needs? And then we kind of start to look for signposting, don't we? We start to look at headings and subheadings. If it's a book, we'll look at chapter headings. A journal article should be really nicely structured, nice and concise. That should give us an indication of where something's going. If there's anything visual in there, like figures or data or images, that can often give us an indication as to the relevance of something that we're looking at. Go to a reference list as well. Scan your eye down the reference list. Do you see other things that you've read appearing in this list of references? Are the words that they're using in their titles, do they feel relevant? All just quick ways of feeling familiar with the whole product before we actually start. And that's, again, one of the dangers when we work through something in a kind of linear fashion is we don't really feel we've got a sense of the shape and size of what it is we're encountering. That's hopefully going to help us decide which bits of this we're going to need to read in more detail for our purpose. So again, just because they've written it in one way, let's not be bound by that sort of chronology, the order in which it's been written. Let's think, well, actually, for my purposes, I want to delve in here first, but then I might want to go back to this section here, or I might just want to read the conclusion and just kind of find out what their key points are. That's equally, totally valid. But it's also fine to say, no, I don't want to read this in any more detail. So that's the kind of scanning area. And then there's this idea of sort of skimming through things. So this is like a little bit more detailed. To begin with, it's really, really surface. And now, like a stone skimming across the water, we're kind of touching down at various points in the text. This is where some sort of speed reading techniques are useful. We're looking actually at more of the words that are written in front of us. And again, we're going to get this sense of the scope, the content. We can start perhaps actually reading in a bit more detail some of the sentences. If somebody's a good writer, they should have a really nicely defined sections where the introductory paragraph tells you what they're going to say. Then there's lots and lots of paragraphs where they say it, and then the concluding paragraph sums things up. And even within a paragraph, it should work in that way. The topic sentence, the first sentence of a paragraph, should indicate the direction of travel. Now, I know that's not always the case, particularly if we've got any philosophers on the call, but more often than not, particularly critical works rather than primary works, you will be able to navigate according kind of to traditions of writing. It depends, obviously, also which kind of writing tradition people come from. In the kind of Western tradition, it's very much like a keyhole thing where we look through, we can kind of get a sense of what something's about, then we open the door and we we're fully immersed in it, and then we can kind of look back through the next door that we've moved through, back through the keyhole and see what's been written. There are other arguments that are kind of much more like a corkscrew, and it's for us to kind of pull out things that are useful. But again, always bearing in mind, what are we looking for? Is it latest developments? Is it evidence? Is it a methodology that's going to be really useful to inform what we're working on? Like we said, is there just a single citation that we want to pull out and use in our work? And so still, we haven't really done any deep reading. We're still kind of asking ourselves questions. Do I still want to read more? I've dipped in, I've possibly even got, a page of notes there from little bits and bobs that I've pulled out of this that give me a sense of what this author's talking about. Do I want to delve any more deeply? If I've answered the questions that I had at the start, and that's why it's really important to keep those in mind, then I can just move on to the next thing. And this is where the kind of note making and critical reading kind of overlays a little bit. We need to start at this stage, even before doing that deep reading, writing some preliminary answers to those questions. If you can sum up at this stage in a sentence or two what that author is saying in that particular text, then maybe that's something you can drop into your essay or thesis later on. You've got that statement about this particular author makes this and this point, making use of material about this and the other. So if you've got that little summary, that's great. That's you already being critical because you're situating it within your own focus. So let's actually do a little bit of reading. So we'll take a kind of 5 minutes now to do this task. First of all, you've got those little questions from your KWL grid, hopefully, what do I want to get out of this text that I've brought along today? Then scan and skim. So like we said, scanning, like really, really kind of surface, just sort of like looking over it. Skimming, we're actually touching down at various points in that text. If you can do your whole text, if you've got a journal article, see if you can just go through it really, really quickly and get a sense of what it's about. Or if you've got a much larger text, perhaps, pick a chapter or even a subsection of that if you know it's a really dense text. And would you be able to answer those questions that you had from that KWL grid in those 5 minutes? I know it's a really, really kind of false amount of time, but let's give it a go and see if you can get something from it. So I'll set the timer and off you go. Okay, does anyone want to reflect on the reading that they've chosen and whether or not they were able to get anything from that skimming or scanning, or do they feel that they would always need to go, you would always need to go into greater depth? And also just a reflection as to whether this is how you normally would read. Anything, as I said, you can pop stuff in the chat or you can unmute, or if you don't want to share, that's also totally fine.
I would typically start. The document I've chosen is a paper from a journal. I would typically start with just a skim of the keywords and the abstract, and that's pretty much what I did here. But the very nature of an abstract was that it was a little bit too high level, and then skim reading and scanning over the body of the text below. To be honest, it just sort of flagged that I needed to stop and read some of it in greater detail. So I sort of found that by trying to adopt this process, it only got me so far, and then I just had to put on the brake.
Okay. Yeah. But at least perhaps it would give you a sense of whether or not something was relevant.
The reason for stopping and needing to get into it deeper is because I thought, there probably is something of relevance in here, but I just need to understand how relevant, or am I just going down the wrong path?
Okay, that's useful. Thanks for the reflection. Thank you. If no one else wants to share. Oh, yeah, Sarah.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, mine was quite interesting in that I'm looking at a document about the Roman Empire, and I skimmed through looking for something in relation to the particular emperor I'm writing about. But what it did do is I noticed that there was a previous emperor on there that there's obviously something I need to read. So I need to follow back through the references of who had written the thing and actually read something else before. So it was quite good in that I do tend to overread. And I wasn't quite looking at the right document. There's probably a more valuable one that I can go and read instead.
Okay, that's really useful to know. And I think, then it's about making that decision, isn't it? What do you do? Do you immediately stop and go and do that background contextual reading, or do you make a note of that and kind of try and finish what you started here and then go back? And it just depends, isn't it, whether or not the two are kind of contingent. Do you need to understand one to understand another? Yeah.
You know what, Sarah, that's a great point, because I think I had something similar in mind where I was reading it and went, oh, hang on, I just need to double check this against something from years before that I've read, several months ago. And just, that was part of why I felt like I needed to stop midway through.
Yeah, so redirect you somewhere else.
Just to understand the relationship. Is it similar? Do I, I immediately went straight to the references of bibliography at the end of the paper to see, was it in there? Do I need to go back and then do a compare and contrast? These were the thoughts that were sort of going through my mind at the time.
And that's it. It's those kind of critical moments, isn't it, where you are putting it in that wider context of what do I know, what don't I know, and how is this moving my reading on? And so just kind of having some sort of record of that is really, really important to kind of guide our direction. Otherwise, it gets kind of quite chaotic, doesn't it? You think, oh, I'll just leap over there and I'll leap over there, and somehow recording those thoughts, even if it's just under a heading of, okay, I read this paper and this made me think about this, and then I had to go off and read this, just so when you come back to it, you either feel in a better position to read it, or actually you can kind of dispose it and you don't need to read it all over again. So I will just share again. Okay, so, it's then an iterative process, isn't it? What did we want to know? What questions did we have? What did we learn? In some cases, we learned that there was other information that we needed to go and get first. And then we start all over again. So what do I want to know from this new paper that I'm going to read? What questions have I still got that I didn't get from my last paper? And then I move on. And so, it doesn't actually have to look like this, but that kind of critical process and narrating that through your note making is going to be really, really important. Because especially if you're working on a thesis over 2 or 3 or 4 years, depending whether you're a master's or PhD student, you're going to forget why you read something. And so that's when your note making is really, really critical. What was I thinking when I came to this? Where was my understanding at? Why did I approach it in a particular way? Just making sure that is all in there as much as what the person actually said in that paper or book. Okay, so the actual kind of what we might consider reading, if we haven't actually got down to the reading yet, is when we've decided whether or not something's relevant, then we'll go into it in a more focused way. And that's fine to do that after 10, 20 seconds, as much as it is after 5 or 10 minutes of scanning through something. Keep those questions in mind. That's going to guide the way that you read. It means you don't have to read absolutely everything. If you are struggling to kind of stay focused, it's fine to read stuff aloud, to use finger tracking like we do when we learn to read. Lots of those techniques that when we start out, the reason we do it is it kind of helps with comprehension. It helps keep us focused. So if there's a really knotty section and you just find that every time you look at it, it's just really difficult to kind of see what's happening, read it aloud, put that kind of the punctuation into it to help you understand where things are going. If there's a word then that jumps out at you, like, actually, I don't totally understand what that means, jot it down on a bit of paper. Just engaging with something rather than just looking at it, doing something active can really kind of help with that understanding. Like we said, if there's charts, if there's diagrams, use them to help you understand what you're reading. Don't just kind of look at the diagram and then go back to the reading. You might have to flick between them, several times. And again, what questions have we got left even when we've done the reading? So like we said, if we're trying to do this to understand, try not to get too sidetracked. Try and write down words. Try not to look up things as we go. When we are summarizing things, and this again might be in our head, not even in a note sense, what are the key ideas that we're getting through this? What are the main arguments? It's fine to go back and read something again. And I really like this phrase, this idea of reducing uncertainty. Like you say, Nicola, you look at something, you think, I'm not getting this at all. I'm really going to have to read this a little bit more. You might read it once and still not totally understand everything. That's fine. But the more that we engage with that text, the more we reduce uncertainty, the more we feel comfortable working with that material. And that's, I think, quite a nice way to think about it. We might never understand it totally even, but we might have a better sense by re-engaging with material. Yeah, and the idea is slowly, our understanding evolves and grows. Now, one of the questions we get quite a lot is obviously, reading on paper is really different to reading online. And so I just thought it'd be worth flagging up some of those differences. Yeah, definitely the level of distractions is much higher if we're reading online. We get notifications coming, we get things that are interesting to us, there are words we start Googling, and then suddenly 10 minutes later you find yourself looking at something completely different to what you were actually doing. So there's lots of little browser add-ons, there's things on your mobile you can get that can kind of help keep you focused. So they can lock down some apps so that you just are working with a particular app for a certain amount of time. Obviously you can just set yourself a timer and say, okay, I'm going to do deep reading for only about 15 minutes because then my head starts to hurt. And then I'll follow up a few little things that'll kind of keep me interested, and then I'll go back and do some more deep reading. Do think about messing around with all the settings on your computer. It actually makes a massive difference. If our eyes get tired, it's really difficult to do the work, like we said at the very start, some of these wider obstacles that we have. So think about having enough lighting in the room, make sure your screen isn't too bright, make sure you've got good contrast. Play around with the font size, the typeface, line spacing. There's lots of settings on browsers that can help you with this. Ebook platforms will allow you to play around with this as well. If you can, copy and paste text even into Word and just chop it around a little bit. Do try and take breaks. Like you said, there's again a couple of apps you can download, Stretchly or iLeo, which prompt you to stop, take a break, or just to shift your vision from your computer screen to the middle distance or to a kind of closer distance, just to kind of keep yourself moving. Our bodies get stiff and our eyes get tired if we stay in the same place for too long. There's also loads of other functionality out there. You can think about converting text to speech. Microsoft Word actually has this inbuilt now, but there's also, I put 2 other links on there as well for apps that you can use for this. There's some paste screen reading as well on Chrome, read and write, and it can just, help flash up words, in a regular way so that you can kind of digest material. Again, a lot of this taps into speed reading ideas as well. But I think playing around with the way that things are presented to us online is one of the best ways to kind of keep it interesting and stop us getting too tired. And there is a dedicated LibGuide to reading online. So the very end bit of reading is kind of note making. And when we looked at that kind of the steps in academic reading, you know, one of the things at the end was, can we recite what we've got and review it? And this is quite a nice way to think about kind of pre-notes almost, or maybe post-notes. You know, at the end, perhaps you've taken loads and loads of linear notes just as you've gone through, and you've kind of got them in a hierarchical or chronological order. But at the very end, can you say in a sentence what this was about? So just restating exactly what they said. Can you describe it? Can you bring in kind of more arguments rather than just kind of factual stuff? But ultimately, can you say what that text means for you? And like we said, that's the whole purpose of reading in the first place. What does it mean within your wider context and your own personal understanding? So there's those sort of 3 stages, and almost to try and write them as 3 separate sentences is quite a nice way to do it. Don't worry about having to write, you know, huge paragraphs about this person's writing at this particular stage, but just to check your own understanding, can I say these 3 things about it? Okay, so I'll just pause there and ask if anyone else has got any reflections on critical reading or their own reading practices or anything that we've talked about this morning.
Lauren,
Okay,
there's one
so
in the chat.
oh yes. Is there? Sorry, it's not not popped up on my phone. Okay, I'll stop sharing and oh, thank you. Okay, so what's the value of summarizing? So I think wherever possible, we're talking about summarizing it for your own purposes, so that in theory, it's like pre-writing. If you can summarize that in a couple of sentences, you can then potentially lift that straight into whatever you're working on. If you've got that summary, that overarching summary, for a start, it's useful when you come back to something. It tells you straight away what that was about. You don't need to reread any of the original work. But also that by kind of critically summarizing something, like we said, setting it within a wider context, analyzing exactly what it is that their kind of key points are, you've got that writing down already. So yes, it can take time, that's true. But the hope is that in the long run, it actually is going to save you a bit of time. Because if you just take linear notes, then the worry is that you kind of come back to those notes and you look at them and they're not really sort of fit for purpose. You're going to have to reread them all. You might have to summarize then. And there's obviously a really fine balancing act here, because sometimes you don't quite know what your ultimate purpose is, particularly in the early stages of a research process. You're going to be reading for this kind of wider background information. But as you kind of slowly begin to kind of crystallize and solidify some of those research questions, hopefully that reading kind of has purpose. I hope that makes sense. It doesn't work for everybody, but I think having some kind of overview that's like short and succinct might actually help you in the long run. Go back to the note making. Okay, so a lot of the stuff for note making is the same as reading, kind of having purpose, but we'll just kind of wind it back to the kind of absolute fundamentals. Why is it we even bother to take notes? It's might be to remind us what was said in a lecture. It's to save us rereading a whole book, you know, 2 years down the line. We don't need to reread it again because we've got some really useful notes on it. So it's a way of condensing. And I guess in that sense, that's what we're doing. We're always summarizing whenever we're taking notes. We might be taking notes of kind of physical things. So particularly if you're within the sciences, physical samples or data that you've been generating, we have notes of that again, so we can find things more easily, so that we can get a sense of what is in a particular file. It's helpful to always have like a README file or something like that within our data. If you've got interview data, that sort of thing, we don't want to have to read it all the time. So having notes on it, you know, how did we do it? Why did we take it? Access issues, all those sorts of things. It's kind of shortcuts, isn't it? It's kind of condensed versions of things. We might take notes if there's an examine part to our course as well, to help us remind us everything that we've learned so far, help us with that kind of recall and reviewing part of reading. Or you might be taking notes today, to remind us how to do things. If you're learning how to use a particular piece of software, taking notes, again, saves us having to relearn every single time. So That's a very long way of saying the whole point of taking notes is not for the moment that we're in, it's for the future. So we always have to kind of imagine ourselves at that future point and think, what would I want to get from these notes in the future? And that's why taking tons and tons of linear notes isn't always very useful, because actually we then have to delve into those again and, you know, reinterpret them and all the rest of it. Think where we might be in the future and what we would want to get from it. Just like with reading, there are, of course, obstacles to taking notes. And what are some of those problems? Often that we write down too much, and then we go back and think, you know, I only needed 3 or 4 lines of those notes, and yet I took 10 pages. It can be time consuming taking notes. It can also be distracting, particularly if you're in a lecture scenario, you're trying to listen to what someone said, you start writing and focusing on the words you're using then, and you look up again and think, I don't know where I'm up to now. So then it becomes stressful. You feel like there's a kind of panic situation when we're taking notes. And yeah, like you identify, Christopher, you know, it can generate additional tasks. You know, sometimes we'll take loads of notes, but then we need to make sure that they're useful. So we need to organize them, whether that's paper notes or digital notes. Can we find them again easily? We might need to resynthesize, not to rewrite them. We don't want just like a pretty version of our notes, but condensing them somehow. And again, yeah, this is something that we do to help us learn when we're revising for exams and things like that. You might have lots of notes. We would then condense them into mind maps or flashcards or something like that. And it's the same when you're working on a research process as well. Is there some way that I can make this quick and easy to pull out from all these notes what I've learned and what I want to take forward? There's a reason why we call this note making rather than note taking, because the idea it should be really active and not a passive task. I know all of you, I'm sure, have moved beyond that idea of, you know, just copying out what we're reading or what we're listening to. But it is really tempting, isn't it? When we're listening to someone, we just write down exactly what they're saying. That's quite a passive thing. We're not really engaging and being critical. There's a little bit of criticality. We're selecting what it is that we write down, but wherever possible, we want our notes to be really active. So we want to ask questions. We want your voice to come out in these rather than the voice of the person who's talking or you're reading about. You determine what those notes look like. You know, you should be able to take control of them. Like we said, don't be bound by the chronology of the author. Think about your needs. And the stuff that you do write down, you know, pay attention to that. That's the stuff that interests you, that excites you, or that you don't really understand and you want to follow up in more detail. We're mainly talking about reading notes, but I did just want to bring in lectures because quite often this is a question as well, or, you know, in a seminar. The main thing is, of course, yeah, trying not to write everything down. Try and develop a shorthand, which I'm sure is useful when you're taking notes from what you've read as well. Do try and work out ways to kind of pay attention. And again, that might be kind of where you sit in a lecture, or if you're listening to something online, again, trying to minimize the distractions of your phone or your computer. And wherever possible, just kind of drawing out the kind of key themes. Again, if somebody's a good speaker, they should structure their lecture in a way that enables you to kind of draw out what the key points are without having to write down absolutely everything. But like we said, you know, with written work, it's really similar to the way that we would read. Make sure you prepare. So don't just start writing straight away. Think about how you're going to make your notes work for you. Make them distinctive, make them look interesting. Keep a journal, and we'll look at kind of what we mean by that in a bit more detail. And again, I've said this before, but wherever possible, making those notes a form of pre-writing, things that are going to be helpful for you. So one of the biggest things we would do, you know, when we're making notes is decide actually how we're going to take those notes. And hopefully you've all got some sort of note making system in place. It might be that you work in a sort of analog way, you work on paper, you have notebooks. It might be that you work online and that you use a particular piece of software. You might just use Word, all sorts of different ways of doing it. But whatever it is, think about, again, these big issues for the future. How am I going to find these notes again? How are they going to be useful to me? Have I got enough information in there that I'm not constantly having to keyword search? Is there a way I can draw some of that key information out at the top? Do I know straight away what the file is? Think about file naming conventions. And that's obviously a massive issue now that things like Microsoft Word updates every single time you open a document. So you might know, oh, that was that lecture that was 6 months ago. If you accidentally reopen that and it changes the last saved date, if you haven't got a date in the title, if you haven't got a meaningful title, it might be quite difficult to find that document again. And then you end up doing one of these keyword searches and it brings back, 50 files on your desktop that are all useful. So do try and think about having some way of getting things again. And as ever, I would always say, just make sure that things are backed up. So yeah, if you are just typing notes, and something like Word or OneNote can be really helpful. If you prefer to keep your notes with your references, then I would always recommend using Zotero or Mendeley. As you probably know, if you've been to any of these sessions, we try and push Zotero as much as possible because we think it saves you huge amounts of time when you come to reference. But actually, the note-making features in there are really excellent as well. And if you're not familiar with them, I really recommend having a look. We'd be happy to sit with you. You can bring out, there's quite a developed note-making format on there. So as you can see, you can add headings in, underscore things, bold, embolden things. You can physically highlight. If you open up your PDF, so if you work a lot with journal articles, as you can see within Zotero, you can open lots of PDFs at one time. You can put sticky notes on things, you can highlight them in there, and then everything's in one place. And then those notes are also keyword searchable, which is really, really nice, rather than possibly annotating a PDF somewhere else and then not being able to search everything at once. It would just bring back your notes straight away. So there's some really good features there. And again, when you come to cite something directly in Word, you can cite things from your notes. You can just see there, I'm just highlighting a few things in the screenshots. If you work in a kind of way that you like to have sort of sections, I use OneNote for all my note making because I just find that the kind of notebook structure works really, really well for me. As you can see, I've got loads and loads of tabs. I can have loads and loads of sections within those tabs. It just keeps it really, really focused. Mine's much more meeting structured, obviously, rather than research focused. So something like Notion, really, really helpful for kind of nesting your notes within subsections. Overleaf, if you work in LaTeX, is really great for that, and also working in a kind of collaborative way as well. Just a screenshot there from Notion, lots of nice templates on there as well. And that's something that seems to be growing in popularity. And if anyone on the call today is a big Notion user and you're willing to share your notebooks, then you can perhaps do that at the end. We had somebody last year who had a really kind of developed system that was quite nice to see. But just thinking about your tools and again, making sure you're getting the most out of them. If you get frustrated by the tools you're using, it probably is worth spending a couple of hours just exploring a few other options, and we can kind of help you with that. Backing up, not going to say too much about that, but please do. Every year we get somebody who says, I've lost my LibreArch file, it's got all my notes in, or I've lost my black notebook, have you seen it anywhere? If you do work particularly in hard copy, then please make sure you back stuff up by scanning or photographing or just having some sort of record that doesn't rely on those notes being in your hand. Okay, so again, like we said, before you read, think of your questions. Then get some sort of template set up so you're ready to make notes straight away. We talked about skimming, but then this is where the actual note making comes in. If you can, after you've done some of that scanning and skimming, kind of writing down from memory what you think is going to be useful from this text, not looking back, not checking the text. Have you actually got in your head what this is about before you actually start? And if you identify that you haven't, then yeah, that's when a little bit more deep reading comes in helpful. Wherever possible, summarizing or paraphrasing is really, really important. Not describing, keeping the focus on those questions that you had, rearranging the information for your own particular purposes. And like we said already, this idea of, can you explain something to a peer? So if you phoned up a friend or family member and they said, oh, what you've been working on this week, could you critically reflect on what you've been reading, not just recount it, not just read out exactly what it said, but really start to kind of engage with it. What have you taken from this? And until you've got that critical perspective in your notes, I suggest you don't move on. You actually have something interesting to say about that in your notes before you read the next thing. So a lot of that is kind of very similar to the reading. Now we're going to look at kind of some of the more actual methods of note making, many of which I'm sure you've tried before. But I think wherever possible, try and make those notes as distinctive as you can. But before you do anything else, make sure you've got all the bibliographic details down, or if it's a lecture, the details of that. Make sure you've got page numbers down. We had a master's student, last year, who part-time master student, so they were at a distance and they had to come to Cambridge for 2 days to run around frantically looking at books that were in an array of libraries across Cambridge because they hadn't taken just the proper bibliographic information. They were missing some of their page references. They were pretty sure where they got it from, but not exactly. And it was a mega task. And I was on the phone phoning up libraries to make sure that books were available when the person got there. So if nothing else, please make sure you have those. Then moving on to your own thoughts, make sure that you can get into those notes really quickly. So have you got headings, bullets? Is there numbering in there? Have you prioritized points that you've pulled out of it? Making sure it's really clear what are your thoughts and what are the thoughts of others. Again, sadly, every year we have a significant number of plagiarism cases within the college, just where more often than not, people have not intentionally plagiarized. They just kind of got confused by the information that they had as to what were their thoughts, what were the thoughts of somebody that they'd read. They hadn't quite thought of a way to put it into their own words. They just sort of got around changing the odd words. So the more that you can be critical in your note making and distance yourself from the way that the author has framed things, unless you're directly citing, of course. But that distinction is really, really important, particularly on a longer project where you're not going to clearly remember things when you come back to your notes. Like we said, having some shorthand, some abbreviations to hand is really useful, and we've got quite a nice list of those. It was originally produced by Warwick, but it's on our LibGuide. So if you're not kind of sure of how you could shorten things down rather than just abbreviating every single word, there are some nice little symbols on there. And give yourself space to engage with your notes. So if they are in hard copy, put some big margins down the sides where you can put thoughts and reflections in afterwards. If you're working on a template online, again, just set it up in a way that enables you to kind of come back and mess around with everything that you've read, that it's not just kind of in one fixed order. So of all the different types of notes that we have, linear is probably, the most popular, and that does just involve starting writing at the top of your page and writing often in the order in which you read or hear something. It's great if something is really long and you feel you can just kind of keep going over several pages. You can take as many notes as you like, but they're really uninspiring more often than not. All your notes are going to look identical, and it's going to be really difficult for you to pull out what's really pertinent from them. There's also, like we said, a real risk of just repeating what somebody else has said if you take this approach, and more often than not, you're going to need some sort of summary. So, example of linear notes here, just all looks the same. It's difficult for me to work out there whether or not I'm just repeating what this person has said, whether or not my own thoughts are in there. Doesn't really mean a lot. This is an example of some kind of handwritten notes, linear notes, but done in a slightly more interesting way, where you've got bullet points, you've got headings, there's some colour been introduced. You can see there are kind of call out boxes that they've got in green where it's raised a question, something that they want to follow up in more detail. The exclamation marks are useful to kind of identify key points that they've got. If it is a quote, it's really clearly identified. Just some way of engaging. And I'm sure you do this already. But I do think more often than not, it is helpful to have some kind of template to structure your note making. And this might only be for that scanning and skimming phase, that idea of just kind of what can I take from this in the first place? Wherever possible with these templates, obviously you haven't then got the space, that kind of luxury of space that you have with linear notes. So you're going to have to use short sentences, this phrase here, telegraphic sentences. If you imagine, 100+ years ago when people were sending telegraphs, really, really succinct, but it got the message across. And think how you can do that without wasting kind of extraneous words on something, just the key points. So the Cornell method is one that's well known. You may indeed use it yourself. The idea is dividing your page with a sort of 2-column structure, and that can be off-center or it can be 50-50 on your page. But on one side, pulling out the key words and ideas that the author or the lecturer is sharing. These might be dates, institutions, key figures, there might be key words, key terms, there might even be little drawings and diagrams or tables and charts that you need to pull out of something, but it does give you that space to get your own ideas down. Now, the idea of the original Cornell method is that it is this succinct. It's almost like a cover sheet. So if you take really long linear notes, you might want to produce one of these as like a top sheet that gives you that summary straight away. And if you've got a nice template, it won't take you 2 seconds online just to reproduce that page and get the main ideas across. A lot of people also find this useful if they are looking to feedback to a reading group or in a seminar, just the key points on a single page. And I've even had undergraduate students who said they find it really difficult to feedback on their essay in a supervision. And so they worked with this model and found it really helpful, again, for summarizing what they wanted to say. So, a cover sheet isn't a radical idea, but giving it some structure in this way, again, means consistently you can go to any reading that you've done and you can just straight away get the main points from it. And this is how it might work in a longhand format as well. Quite often when we're reading, yes, we want to take really long notes, but we also, like we said, we want to position this within our wider reading as well. So having another set of notes running at the same time, that could be some sort of thematic matrix. And this might work quite well if you're doing a literature review. These kind of key topics, these key ideas that you're looking for in this phase of your reading. So it could be your preliminary reading, it might be way more in depth on a particular topic, but they might still be key things that you're looking for. Pop those across the top of this matrix and then down the side, think about each source that you read in turn. And if you do something like this on Excel, it allows it kind of to be relatively large scale, but you can then really quickly see that when you're coming to write up, you've got loads to say about topic 1. Topic 2, you actually haven't got as much. Now, is that because people aren't mentioning it? Is it because there isn't the reading out there? Is it because it's identified a gap in your reading? So again, this just helps position that one reading within the wider scheme, because that's what happens when you come to write up. Unless you're just doing a kind of author by author A to Z literature review, which is quite rare, you're probably going to be working in some way thematically. And so it helps if you've got kind of these top level notes. That means that when you come to write up, just at a glance, straight away, you should be able to write something without having to go too deep into your wider notes. Any summaries that you are doing where you feel you do need to read a whole book or a journal article, this is just quite a nice template, something called the tower block. So the basement is the book details, the ground floor is the objective, what's this person trying to get across, quick summary about each chapter or each section of an article, and then at the top, your summary, not their summary, but what do you think this was about? That can be quite nice, again, for a literature review, having that as a top level cover sheet that goes over 10 or 20 pages of notes that you've made from something that you can really quickly extract ideas from. Mind maps, traditionally used for revision, but also, again, a really good way of grappling with material, of reordering that material, of taking control of it and not being bound by the order in which it's written or spoken to you. So it liberates you from that structure, means that you can impose your structure over it. And what's brilliant about it is that it is flexible. It means that you can add in your ideas really, really easily. You can start drawing connections. Somebody might talk about something at the beginning of an article and at the end of an article. And if you just take linear notes, those two related points are separated by many, many words. If you do it in a mind map, you can engage with that a little bit more and make that connection. You don't need to be able to write quickly, but you probably do need to be able to think quite quickly to think about the kind of key points as they're emerging for it not to get too confusing. What it does, though, again, help you do is draw out those themes, makes it easier to start writing. So this is, a hand-drawn one, really, really basic, really, really light touch, but that might be all you need to take from a particular article when you come to write up on it. Like we said, you don't necessarily need pages of notes. But there's loads of online tools out there as well. Mindly is a really nice one. Have I got a screenshot of it? Yeah, this is it here. And you can just drill down, and there's a really nice little animation on their front page. If you click on one of these, it then opens it up again. It then opens it up again. So it's a really good way of storing information and for you pulling out the kind of key points from something. Canva does some quite nice, pretty ones. And I've forgotten which one this is. It's on my list on that previous slide. But again, there's ways of working with them online. And sometimes, yeah, just re-engaging with the material in this way forces you to question it and query its usefulness and relevance to your particular work. Okay, so we've got a little bit of time now. Perhaps using the text that you had earlier, maybe choose a section of that text to read in a bit more detail, or try and do a kind of skim level set of notes, just kind of what the key themes that come out. And then think about your own note-making practices. If you are really wedded to the idea of linear notes, that's great, but perhaps reflect on ways that you could make them more engaging or more active, or building in space to kind of put in your own voice. Or perhaps try one of the templates that we've looked at so far. So the Cornell one, where we divide it down the middle, a thematic matrix, or a mind map. And I'm just going to quickly show you our LibGuide, which hopefully is something that you're all familiar with. We've got the section on critical reading there, but also on note making, and under one of these tabs, under the try it out, that's where the link to those frequently used abbreviations is. So you can perhaps think about some of your own shorthand and if there's a way that you can supplement that. Under Cornell, there's the template there as a PDF, but it also describes how to use it there. A few ideas there for mind maps. And if you want to do something on a lecture rather than doing something on that you're reading, there's just a 3-minute lecture there that you can listen to, and you can perhaps take your own notes on. So I will let you explore that. I'll put the link to that in the chat. And I think I have to stop sharing to do that. And I will just share my screen again. And I'll just revisit the one about the tower block, Christopher, because you asked about that. So you can come up with your own structure for it, obviously, but dividing it up in some way so that each section or each chapter has a little box where you could make notes. And then there's a kind of your voice coming in at the end in terms of the summary. So I will just give you 5 minutes to do that. So doing a little bit more reading and just maybe trying a new method of note making, or possibly just revisiting your established method already. Okay. What I'll do is I'll just carry on to the end of this, and then we'll have some time at the end for kind of chat and reflection on whether you tried anything new there, or whether you just kind of assessed your note making strategies more generally. We looked at a kind of thematic approach to note making before, and I just wanted to explore that in a little bit more detail, the idea of note making for literature reviews. I think the big thing, obviously, with that is having some way to tag your reading so that you don't kind of have to go back through at the end and say, oh, yeah, what were the kind of key themes? As those themes emerge, you know, whether it's just kind of in the header or footer, if you're using something like Word, if you're using something like Zotero, there's a really nice way that you can start sort of tagging your particular notes. Within Notion, again, there's ways of kind of flagging that up as well. So, or if they're linear, you know, or if they're hard copy, you know, just having kind of some space on each page where you can start writing in these themes so you can find things again really quickly. A lot of what we do is thinking about ways, like thinking forward, thinking about ways of being more efficient and productive in what we do. More often than not, just having a spreadsheet that tracks these kind of key themes, these issues as they emerge. Obviously, you can kind of be really fluid with that. You can keep moving things around. There's always going to be new themes that emerge from your reading, but having some sort of overview, I guess, rather than getting lost in kind of individual sets of notes, taking that bigger picture, because that's what you're kind of going to need to have at the end of the day. So it could just be almost like a cover sheet. It could just be things that I know I'm going to need to talk about. So if you're working within areas of the social sciences or the sciences, you know, thinking about what are the areas of the study, what were the methodologies used, what were the conclusions, like just top level questions really, really quickly that I can see what was useful about this. There's also nice functions for that kind of top level overview from some of the databases. This is just a screenshot from Scopus, which covers all different subject areas, although probably slightly more heavily weighted towards social sciences and sciences. But when you've conducted a search, if you find something that's, you know, you get a really nice keyword search string and you glancing through think, yeah, actually all these look pretty relevant, but it's still quite a few. You don't want to kind of be dipping in and out of every single article that it's returned. There's the export function, which I've highlighted there. And you can export to a spreadsheet really easily. You decide what information you export. It automatically exports the stuff on the left, the kind of citation information. If you check that central column, the abstract in keywords, it brings it out like this. So really, really quickly, you can kind of scan down through the abstracts and see whether or not something's useful. So that's useful in making a decision about whether or not you decide to read something, but also, again, in terms of kind of, you've then got all that data, you can then easily move that into a spreadsheet really, really quickly. You don't need to be kind of copying and pasting or retyping. It could be that you keep this and you just delete the stuff that's not useful, and then you just kind of add a series of tags at the end of that as well. This is, again, quite a rigid one, a bit like
Laura,
that kind of cover sheet.
Are
Yeah.
you sharing your screen?
Ah,
Is this something you're referring to? I'm not seeing it.
Yes. Sorry. Oh, had I not been sharing? Oh gosh, okay, I'm really sorry. I thought I'd been sharing all the way during those notes as well. Sorry, it's when we dropped out, wasn't it, to look at the questions? Yeah, okay, let me go back a little bit here then. Thank you for flagging that. Let's go a bit sticky today. Okay, so yes, this was a sort of template that I was saying that you could create if you read things in a really similar way and you need to draw out specific issues. These are the screenshots from Scopus, so obviously you'll have time to go back and look through these, but this just shows you how you can export from within Scopus, select that middle column, the abstracts and the keywords, and then this is what it looks like in Excel. So you can see how it draws out the data for you to really, really quickly scan through maybe, you know, 100 or so articles. And then you can either take a few little notes on the side, like I said, or you can just take the data that you take from this and put it into another spreadsheet to give you that overview. This is the review matrix. Again, if you're collecting similar information from, if you're doing perhaps a systematic review, this might be a really nice way of approaching that as well. But I think, yeah, wherever possible, having that top level view as early on as possible is going to save you time in the long run when you come to write up. Now, I mentioned a couple of times the importance of keeping, recording all those thoughts in your head. You know, why am I reading this? How does this contribute to what I know? Not just on the notes themselves, but so that you can kind of re-inhabit yourself from, you know, a couple of months ago. So keeping a reading journal, keeping that reflective reading going on can be really helpful. So these might just be big thoughts that occur to you. They're not things that kind of directly come from the reading, so it might not feel appropriate to put them with the notes for a particular paper, but if it's drawing out big questions, areas that you haven't really covered, think about where you're going to record that. And if you have a dedicated reading journal or just a document or wherever it is, then it's not some sort of random note you've made on a reading you might never go back to. It's not a post-it note on your desk. It's a place that whenever things are coming out of your reading, you've got them recorded in the same place. Again, that's going to save you time. So these kind of connections that you might be making, implications for your research, big issues that you have, tiny issues, you can see how your ideas are developing. And this could just be like a really good kind of housekeeping practice at the end of a day, when you've done quite a bit of reading, just taking that time to stop and be reflective. And that loops us right back to that stuff that we were doing at the very beginning. A blog is quite a nice way to do this. It doesn't have to be public. You can make a private blog, but the reason to do that is it date stamps everything. You can really easily add tags to your entries as well, so that you can click on one of those tags and bring together all the readings that you've made that are on those themes. And again, it's your voice that's coming out in this. It's not the voice of someone else. So if you find that your notes do tend to quite closely reflect the content and voice of the author, then this is again a way to get that your own authorial voice developing for when you come to write up. Okay, we said it all the way through, but think about ways to minimize distractions. Give yourself really time-limited windows, however long you think you can effectively read and write for. Try and be productive, you know, try and create a physical space that works for you. You've got space to spread out. You can easily find your notes again. It's a really obvious thing, but again, some of these tiny little things could actually just make the process of taking notes really, really tricky. And like I said, all the way through, the earlier you start writing, the better. So get your ideas together, start getting your thoughts down, and start thinking about how you could use this in your final written piece of work. Okay, that's everything. As I said at the very start, you know, I don't think that any of this is revelatory. It's all kind of examples of best practice that we've gleaned from lots of videos and lots of books that we read about these things, about when we've spoken to students who come to us with problems, things that have helped them in the past. It might be that none of this works for you, or it might be that you just take something really tiny from today, or at least it's giving you a chance to reflect on how you best carry out your research. If you've got any questions, please do contact me or Alberto. My email address is here, and we're really happy to sit with you one-to-one, particularly if there are any of the tools that we flagged today that you'd like to explore in a bit more detail. The LibGuide, which I've already provided a link to in the chat, essentially summarises what we've talked about today and provides some of those templates. And if you have any comments as well about the session and you don't feel able to email them to me, then there's a feedback form here. That QR code should take you to an online form where you can provide us with some feedback. But what I will do is stop sharing now and just give you a chance to ask any questions, share any reflections from today's session.
Hello. Yeah, actually the thing that really struck me was the tower block method, because one of the things I find that when I get so far, I read a lot of separate books, and then I can end up having to go back through the notes I've made and reread those books, and I've not summarized clearly enough what I got out of them the first time and what was important. So I think that's going to really help me for future reasons to not have to keep repeating myself and rereading things that I've already read.
Brilliant. Okay, that's great. Yeah, if there's a little efficiency in there, and obviously there's a slight time cost, it will take you a little bit of time to fill in a template like that, but hopefully not so long that, yeah, it'll outweigh, you know, the benefits will outweigh the costs. That's great. Thank you, Sarah.
I'd just like to add in for the first exercise that we did, I tried reflecting on a book that I brought along, and like others, I found it quite dense, and it sort of came to the conclusion that it needed a bit of a deeper read. But for the second one, I tried reflecting on a podcast that I listened to by an academic who'd been recommended to me, and I'd actually made notes when I'd listened to it last week, but hadn't actually got around to summarising it. So I think that's probably going to be quite useful for sort of other formats as well. So if, debates, to watch sort of debates sometimes, and so I think that, yeah, no, I found it very useful to try and do that. Provide a bit
That's
of
brilliant.
structure
Thank you. Yeah, and I think that's important. That's why, you know, we do tend to focus on reading, but obviously there's lots and lots of different ways that you're going to be gathering research data. So yes, whether in fact you could use this with kind of primary research, as it sounds like that's what you're doing as well, you know, and if you were doing it with interviews as well, or if you're reading old newspapers or whatever it is, thinking of some way of having that kind of little bit of a summary that can save you time in the long run. It stops you having to go back and really kind of do deep engagement when you don't need to. I mean, there'll always be times when you want to go back and properly pull something apart, and you might even want to reread something, the whole thing, you know, book or article again. And that's fine, because our research questions change all the time, our focuses will change. And again, I think that's why the reading journal is quite nice to sit alongside that, because it does help position that reading as to where we are at that particular moment in time. You know, if your questions do change later on, it might remind you, say, oh yeah, I did read that with a really specific purpose, and now my thoughts have changed a little bit. I might want to go back and just look at it from a different angle. Okay, well, I'll stay on for a few more minutes if anyone else has got any other questions. Otherwise, thank you very much for joining us today. And yeah, it'd be always, as ever, it's really interesting to hear if you have any kind of reflections when you've tried to put a few of these things into practice. Other than that, though, hope you have a good rest of your weekend.
Thanks a lot. You too.
Thanks, Laura. Will the deck be shared post meeting?